So personally, obviously invested in Bitcoin. One thing that keeps me from investing everything I own into Bitcoin is the risk of black swans. Is, for example, what if Satoshi is malign? What if there's a bug in the code? What if something, a risk that we're not considering? How do you approach those risks that are there, very unlikely? They're not zero. How do you go about those possible black swans, and how do you which ones do you consider? Which ones do you have on your radar where you're like, okay, I tried to rule out that, How do you go about that?
Well, I mean, I think it's reasonable for anybody to allocate their portfolio to various assets because of risks. I don't think it's constructive to spend time dwelling on black swans. By definition, they're unknown unknowns. So if they're unknown unknowns, you're just wasting mental energy. If you're concerned that Bitcoin might go to zero, then invest 90% of your assets instead of 100% or 50, and then move on. When you get in a car, it's possible for you to get in a traffic accident and you might get hit from the rear. You won't see it coming. How do you plan for that? Well, if you keep looking behind in your rear view mirror, looking behind you, you're more likely to get in an accident. So it's kind of dysfunctional to worry about something that you can't anticipate because you're wasting mental energy. So no, I don't really concern myself with it. If you're an investor and you want to invest in 10 different things, for example, you might want to invest in someone that makes hamburgers and someone that flies airplanes, but you don't want the pilot of the airplane to be continually, worrying about some random meteorite hitting the airplane and checking for a meteorite to hit the airplane every 10 seconds because it'll interfere with the landing. And you don't want the burger flipper to be, it's possible you could serve someone a cheeseburger and they'll choke on it and die and sue you and shut down your restaurant. How many people that run restaurants worry about that? By the way, if your waitress walks up to you and says, are you going to choke on this cheeseburger and sue the restaurant? How's that for business? So I just think that, wouldn't you kind of be angry at the waitress and say, I'm not going to eat at this restaurant. Why don't you guys focus upon serving the cheeseburger? Stop worrying about that stuff. You can't control that. So I think worry about the things you can control. By definition, you can't control a black swan.
What do you think are extremely optimistic things that you might have on the radar that the average Bitcoin investor out there does not have on their radar, where you're like, that's probably not priced in yet in what you see on crypto Twitter, in Bitcoin community?
I think that most people don't really understand that Bitcoin is the world's first digital monetary network, which means that ultimately it's 100 million people using it going to 1 billion in 5 years. And eventually everybody with a mobile phone will have some Bitcoin on their mobile phone. I think that that's a big dynamic. I think that is the big tech companies like Facebook and Apple and Amazon and Google and as they embrace it, I think that's going to drive adoption, and I think they'll have to embrace it. I think the big banks will actually start to embrace Bitcoin as collateral. I think that most people haven't really thought, most people that buy Bitcoin, they think I'm buying it so I can sell it when it goes up. I think what they don't realize is that ultimately no one's ever going to sell Bitcoin. As the market matures and as the banks mature, you'll buy it and hold it forever. You'll give it to your daughter or your son and your son's son and your son's son's daughter. Why would you ever sell it ever?